About Harry, Part 2, Chapter 26, Talking about the Weather. In the morning, Harry really wanted to make up. It was tiring to carry this bad mood with him. He didn't feel up to affront another surely difficult day at work without having received a parting kiss and a smile from her. Therefore, he got to the bathroom where Ginny was doing a morning routine. Yes, there was a morning one too, made of some other moisturizer, brush, makeup, and God only knows what else. She glimpsed at him, but didn't utter any word, busy in massaging a thick white cream on her forehead with some precise movement. She didn't look forbidding though, and that was already half of the battle won. Harry stood on her side, looking at her reflection in the mirror, pondering on what to do. Any wrong word could set her off again, and he decided not to risk it, having a gift at it. He took, then, one of her many flacons on the sink. He poured some of the content on his hand and started to rub it on his face nonchalantly. "That's hand cream, Harry," Ginny said, repressing a smile. He took another flacon, always casually from the hundreds, and tried for that one. "That's not right for your skin type," she said. "Try this one," offering him a different bottle. He took it and rubbed some of the pale blue ointment on his forehead like she had done, mockingly. "You must go from the center to the sides," she said reprovingly, but smiling this time. "Come here, I'll show you." He leaned toward her and let her smear his brow how she thought best. He met her gaze and locked it with his own, the touch of her massaging fingers awakening a desire that had already been repressed for a few days under her cold stares and lack of attention. Her lips were so close, half-parted, tantalizing, asking only to be kissed. He gave in the urge, and then he knew that there was something he could tell her that would never have been wrong. "I love you. Do you know that?" he said, moving her sleek red hair behind her ear in a loving caress. "I know," she replied, smiling affectionately. "You don't though," he said, glaring at her, feeling that desire growing inside him steadily. "You have no idea." She couldn't even imagine the deepness of his love for her. It was in every cell of him. It was everything. It made him brave, move, wish, and suffer. The power that made him live. Nothing was possible without her, and everything attainable through her. A love that was painful how strong it was, a sweet and bitter pain that would rage in him when he looked at her. She lowered her gaze under his intense glare. He kissed her brow. "I live for you," he whispered. He took his wrist and brushed his lips longingly on it. "I die for you." He kissed behind her ear, murmuring, "I go mad without you." He caressed her smooth shoulders, letting slip her nightie down on the floor, revealing the dazzling paleness of her skin. "I'd do anything for you." He followed with his tongue the curve of her neck, severing her skin inch by inch, causing a shiver in her body. "I'd kill for you." He moved himself behind her, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The sight of her naked skin, her flushed face, her moist mouth, turned him on even more, annihilating everything but the longing to be inside her. He craved to show her his love in the best way he knew how. It had always been difficult for him to express his feelings through words, but he could show her in a different way. He could show her that insane passion she was able to instill in him. He slid his heavy hands on her body, being already in the limbo of heaven and hell preceding the actual intercourse. He could barely wait, and as he was freeing himself from unnecessary garments, a loud bellow sprang from downstairs. "Mom? Do we still have some chocolate spread? I can't find any." It was Albus. "Fucking hell! Ignore it," he murmured in Ginny's ear that had already turned instinctively toward the door. "Mom!" "Ignore it!" he ordered to Ginny, that was clearly giving sign of awakening from the turmoil that was enveloping them only a few seconds before. Harry didn't have any intention whatsoever to drop it. They were already too far gone for him to stop now. And as he was relieving her from her knickers, a crash was audible from downstairs, some fast stomping up the stairs, and another bellowing. "Mom! James dropped his glass and cut himself!" "God damn it! I'm going to kill! Fighting the urge to attack and dismember two innocent boys, he threw a towel around his hips and made for the door, telling Harry in a temper, "You stay here as you are. I'll be back in a second." He opened the door violently and shot a basilisk look to Albus, who was instantly petrified. "Can't you two just be quiet for 2 seconds, for fuck's sake?" he yelled. "Harry!" Ginny's reproach came from the room. He got his wand and closed the door behind him. "James cut his hand!" Albus stammered, following him already making for the kitchen. 11 years in the muggle world didn't teach you how to use a plaster? He got in the kitchen, and James was clenching his hand, wherefrom a predictable minuscule cut was pouring a single tiny drop of blood. The glass was on the floor, shattered. With a flick, it was whole again. "Give me your hand," he said sharply. James started to suck his fingers sulkily. "It's nothing." Harry, fighting again the urge of kicking them both outside, hissed, "If it was nothing, why cool? Now give me your hand." "It was Albus," James started saying polemical. "Don't throw me under the bus! It was you!" Harry interjected furious. "Hoy! Pack it in! Give me your hand right now or I'll chop it off. I can heal it even without the rest of the body attached to it." James extended his hand promptly, at which he performed a simple healing charm. That done, he shot a threatening look at them, so fierce even James flinched. "For the next half an hour, I don't want to hear another peep from you two. Penalty of death." He ran back upstairs as fast as he could, and opening the door, he found Ginny sitting on the bed, fully dressed, brushing her hair suddenly. "No!" he wailed in despair, throwing himself at her side. "Ginny, please!" he begged, trying to undo her shirt. Ginny blocked his hands. "Harry, we'll be late for work." "I don't bloody care! Ginny, please, I need it!" She smiled, stroking his head tenderly. "You always need it." "Now more than ever!" She stood up, leaving her brush on the mantelpiece and taking her handbag. "Harry, no, I need to go. Training starts in 20 minutes. "I can do it in 10. "And I didn't get my breakfast yet," she continued, ignoring him. "Who's more important, me or a bloody breakfast?" he asked disheartened. "Right now, breakfast. I'm starving." And she left the room. The shock prevented him moving from the bed for a couple of minutes. He was so close to having a wonderful start of the day, and instead he got a full of frustration one. Well, nothing he could do about it. Or at least there was always the Regina way. But he discarded it. Somehow the age for that had passed. He got dressed and dragged himself disconsolate downstairs where Ginny was finishing her meal, reading avidly Witch Weekly for probably the 546th time. He poured himself some coffee, still not properly over the disappointment, and walked toward the window to check the weather outside. Surprise, surprise, drizzling. Never mind, It was going to be sunny at work. "Are we allowed to speak yet?" James asked belligerently. "Yes, unfortunately you are," Harry answered, absent-minded, his attention caught by an envelope on the windowsill just outside. He got it and read the sender. Mrs. Pennyworth. Didn't ring any bell. Perhaps it was for Ginny. He must be her. There were very few people that could send them letters, and he was sure to know all of them. She must have added somebody without informing him. "Ginny, do you know somebody by the name of Pennyworth?" A crash followed his question. James had broken another glass. Harry fixed it, scowling. "That's the second in 20 minutes. Be careful, all right?" Ginny was in a total rush. She didn't hear his question, as she was all busy shoving some papers in her bag. She kissed quickly the boys, and then pecked Harry. "Have a good day at work," he said, half smiling, half frowning. He didn't get exactly what he wanted, but at least they had made up, and he got his goodbye kiss. It wasn't going to be a totally negative day. Seeing his expression, she smiled, amused, giving him another kiss. "I'll make myself forgive tonight, I promise." No, definitely it was not going to be a totally negative day. When she disappeared in the green flames, he looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was very late. So late, he almost choked on his coffee finding out. He let the cup on the table, but then, remembering Ginny's fixation about coasters, removed it hastily and put it in the sink. It was of the most importance not doing anything that could jeopardize her mood that evening. He bade goodbye to the boys with another subtle threat on how to behave, and a second later he was to the office, to the same unabated fuss that he seemed, if anything, increasing. He kept repeating himself that would have worn off eventually. At least, now he was prepared. He wasn't 20 years before. It had been a bit of a shock in his system. Of course, when in Hogwarts, he was already famous, but being in a very confined ecosystem, he never really suffered that much from it. Or better, it seemed so to him now, looking back at that time. It was a kind of minor hassle to contend with compared to Voldemort. Only when he married Ginny, he finally understood. While living with the Weasley, nobody really bothered him, albeit it was only because the whole house was protected by intruders. He didn't know at that time. They explained to him later. Them, unlike he, had grasped the enormity of the growing popularity, and they wanted to protect him until things would cool down a little bit. It had needed several years to cool down, even if only slightly. Years of nerve-wracking for Harry. He didn't know how to deal with it. Now he knew. Well, more or less at least. The important thing was to remain aloof, polite, but detached. He made a trip to reception to apologize for the incrementing task of sorting his mail. The witch behind the counter, that could easily be Elizabeth/his mum's age, shook forth that day his aloofness. After his contrite speech, he got back such an innuendo that caused him an instant flush and disabled his power of speak coherently for some time. It always took him by surprise when it did happen, despite it wasn't seldom. Going through the hall, he was continually stopped by a woman of other department with paltry excuses, all with mini summery dresses, all with the same purpose of showing him ample part of their body, or, if the occasion arose, rapping on him as much as possible. He had never seen so many legs and breasts exposed like those 3 days. No wonder he felt so aroused once home. He made sure to get the lift with another man. It did seem the wisest course of action, since the combativeness showed in the hall. However, he didn't help. The bloke got the chance straight away to introduce himself, following him almost up to his office. bragging a good deal about his wasted skills and the enormous potential still unused by the ministry, trying, at the same time, slyly to extort from him a promise to put a good word for him to the minister. As if. Carola, in the meanwhile, had framed the picture of the magazine, and they were all on her desk on plain sight. He didn't find the strength to oppose himself. He left severe instruction to Elizabeth not to let pass anybody that day, unless a valid business reason could be named, and got into his safe zone, aka his office. On his desk, an elegant small fuchsia box with a silk ribbon, no note, no anything, was waiting for him. He looked at it curiously and suspiciously. Elizabeth didn't mention anything about it. Probably somebody else had left it there before her arrival. With his wand, tapped on it several times, casting different kinds of revealing spells. One couldn't be too careful with these mysterious presents. The ministry was well protected, but nevertheless, because of his job, he had many ill-wishers. Wondering about the possible content, he opened it carefully, his wand ready in case it was needed. But it wasn't a dangerous object. Or better, on a second thought, it was a very dangerous object. It was nothing less than a pair of non-existent black lace sneakers, so minimal that it brought one to reflect on the need of wearing them, so small they were. There was also a note on thick square paper inside. It read, "To remember me by Julia." His ex-secretary. It was past 1 year since that embarrassing encounter when she had tried a very intimate approach, and from then on he had always dodged her as much as possible when crossing her path, notwithstanding that she, absolutely undaunted by his refusal, always tried to trap him in conversations. Yet that encounter, the year before, brief as it had been, had left an impression, and he realized that probably those were the very ones she had that evening, and his mind pressed the replay button instantly. My God, woman, and they talk about men! He was sure that being harassed by a woman was 100 times worse than the other way around, because they really put some actual brain in it. Even this Julia, that probably wasn't the cleverest of her sex, knew how to make you think about her against your will. Men were just physical, period. He was in a reverie, keeping this piece of underwear that had the only aim of letting one fantasize about what they were covering on the tip of his index. And he sighed. He just wanted it to stop. It was so tiring and depressing. He made him feel really worthless. An empty, worthless body, but with a very active, torturing imagination. Replay button again. If I don't get a shot tonight, I swear I'm going to die. The corner of his eyes caught a figure looking at him from the door. He started in fright, letting the knickers fall on the desk. Hermione, bloody hell, is he not accustomed to knock? The door was open, she said simply. What have you got there? A present from our dear Julia, he said disconsolately, showing her the mystifying object. Your ex-secretary? She asked, retrieving it from his hand. Nice, she said disapprovingly, but then observing them with a critic eye. My God, she's tiny. Yes, but she has got everything in abundance, believe me, he muttered warily. I believe you, she said primly, giving back to him. Are you low? Very. Why? He checked the knickers with all the letters ready to be burned. Why? Don't you see the situation I'm in? He said, pointing to the pile of letters. This morning the woman at reception tried to get off with me, and she could easily have been my mother, and I had to wait for a man to get the lift. The girl of the sport department was literally eating me alive with just the power of her eyes. I didn't trust to take the lift along with her. Hermione roared with laughter. Ron would be in 7th heaven if the situation was reversed. It is not flattering, Harry said sternly, standing up and walking about the room. I'm being objectified. If I try to talk with somebody, I get back either an innuendo or absurd requests, all trying to ingratiate themselves. I cannot go anywhere without being asked for a dinner, a party, a drink, and even bloody weddings. He continued, getting upset. All because of my name. All because of something I never wanted to happen in the first place. It's just as though, as a normal person, I don't matter at all. He continued, letting out all the frustration that those days of sick admiration had generated in him. There is me, who freed the world from a dangerous wizard, whom everybody is crazy about, and the other me, the real me, who nobody gives a shit, he concluded bitterly. She smiled, sympathetic. The people who get to know you do truly care, I assure you. Harry let himself fall on the chair, disheartened, without answering. Hermione got close to him and put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Don't allow this situation to get to you. It will fade fast enough. She stopped talking, but seeing his demoralized face, she added, Harry, you're a wonderful person, full of astonishing qualities. Don't let this situation make you think otherwise. He placed his hand on her own and thanked her, feeling slightly better. Finally, somebody to talk to, somebody with whom he could talk about what was ailing him. He just couldn't do it with Ginny. He didn't want her to know what was happening. But then, thinking about Ginny, he recollected that he didn't have to touch Hermione, let alone talk to her. He let her hand go, and dropping again in his despondency, said, I'm not supposed to talk to you. I'm sorry for yesterday, but Ginny found out I had lunch with you and went mental. The magazine with our pictures didn't help. She held me a grudge for 2 days. I just managed this morning to make up. Hermione nodded. She found out. Did she? And then, without waiting for an answer, she added in a sad chuckle. You were kind of obvious. She was bound to spot that something was amiss. What was I supposed to do? He blurted out, upset. I couldn't! He halted abruptly, thinking, I couldn't hug you or tell you how happy I was to see you or that I missed your friendship. He couldn't say any of those things aloud. He couldn't say anything of what was in his mind because of this uncomfortable situation. He left the sentence incomplete. They were silent for a while. Hermione was looking outside the window, where the sun was shining brightly on the Thames. It's always sunny in here, she said pensively in the end. It's nice. Yes, it's nice, he answered sadly, thinking how depressing it was to have to resort to the weather as a safe topic of conversation with her. He talked about the weather with strangers, with people he didn't care about, not with Hermione. Things were really changed. Anyway, she said, and shaking off the gloom and turning toward him, continued businesslike. I'm here for Lupo. There have been some developments that I think might interest you. He gestured at her to sit down, and they just talked about work for the rest of the interview. Chapter 27. We May Have to Move. He got home, beaten, but full of expectation for the evening. Ginny was in a good mood, and kept shooting glances that reassured him on the genuineness of the morning promise. While they were having dinner, a barn owl flew toward the window. Ginny spotted it first. Do you recognize the owl? She asked, quizzical. Harry glanced at it and answered in the negative. He stood up, opened the window, and got the scroll bound to the owl's leg, who flew away soon after. "Are you waiting for a letter?" he asked Jenny, not being any name on it, but she shook her head. Harry opened the scroll and started to read. "Dear Harry, you don't know me. I'm Therese Mallock, an admirer of yours. Your service in freeing us from you know who has been." He didn't even finish to read it as apprehension started to creep over him. They shouldn't receive anything of the kind. The Fidelius charm protects them from this kind of mail, unless they knew the address. But they couldn't know. Nobody included in the secret would give it away. He was sure of it. Nonetheless, the letter was there, in his hand, as an irrefutable proof. He raised two very worried eyes to Ginny, who was waiting to know the content of the letter. He gulped, his mind reeling frantically. He dashed to the mantelpiece and started riffling between the papers on it, agitation growing steadily. "Where is he?" he gabbled. "Where is what?" Ginny asked. "The letter I left here this morning. We received the letter. I didn't know the sender. I thought it was for you," he said, banging his fist on it. The letter wasn't there anymore. "Did you give our address to somebody new?" he asked, turning to Ginny. "No, of course not. Why?" "Down!" he exclaimed, and showed her the scroll. Like him, she just read the first two lines and then looked at him baffled. "How is it possible?" "What's going on?" Albus asked, seeing their behavior. Harry was on him immediately. "Albus, did you give your address to anybody? Did you take the letter on the mantelpiece?" Albus widened his eyes, afraid by his earnestness, and shook his head, but a bit too hastily, and it didn't escape Harry. "Are you sure?" he pressed him on, but as he was formulating the question, he knew already he wasn't guilty of it. Albus didn't have any reason to do that. His best friend was Rose, and she knew their address already. "I swear you I didn't!" Albus answered pleadingly, and Harry believed him. All the same, he knew something, and if he did, it could only come from James. And as he turned toward him, he knew his conjecture was right. James was defiant, arms crossed, looking at Harry challenging. "James, did you give our address to somebody?" he asked, getting warm, seeing that expression on his face that confirmed his fear. James didn't answer, and Harry lunged toward him. "Did you?" he asked again, feeling anger mounting. Ginny, sensing the fast escalation, stood up and ambling over them. "Harry, let me speak to him." Harry forbade her to come any closer, keeping his eyes locked on James. He asked Menatius for the second time. "Did you?" "What if I did?" he answered boldly, his gaze steady. Harry roared and raged. "Do you realize what have you done? Have you got the smallest idea of what you have just done?" he shouted at him. His defiance was enraging him tremendously. He had clearly done it, and didn't seem repentant at all, quite the opposite. He couldn't know what he meant. He was too young to remember what it was like before the Fidelius charm. Nevertheless, he knew what was at stake. It was repeated to him since he was a child. James stood up, confronting Harry. He was getting tall, growing out of childhood very quickly, but nevertheless, Harry was still towering over him of more than a foot. Ginny apostrophized them sternly. "Let's calm down." But they ignored her. James started bellowing too. "I think I've got some right to decide who I want in the secret. I live in this house too." Harry slammed a hand on the table to vent out his anger. "You have absolutely no any right whatsoever," he barked. "Your mother and me decide, not you. You just have to obey what is told you to do." This wasn't anything about sharing the secret with friends. This was clearly an affront to him. Since he was back, he was harboring this resentment over him, and he had finally found a way to strike. James was purple and raged as much as Harry. "What are you going to do if I don't? Are you going to fill me in like you have done to Uncle?" The challenge was staring him in the face, and Harry felt for a moment that he could have done it. He felt dangerously close to the outburst of violence that was sneaking under his skin and could be triggered by anything, by any slight touch from any of them. But Ginny, at least, knew how it was. She had learned the worst way that it was better not to touch him when he was in one of those rage. And she didn't, watching them in apprehension, not knowing what to do, like Albus, the only one still sitting. Harry used all his self-command to utter the next sentence. "Go to your room! Now!" he growled, needing to have him out of his sight. He had never beaten his children, not even a smack when they misbehaved, not approving of that kind of behaviour. He had never been struck by his uncle and aunt. It was more a mental abuse the one he had submitted to, but because of what he suffered whilst a child, he was against any kind of violence on kids, and didn't want to start under the influence of that blinding anger he was having problem to keep under control. It wasn't a way. It wasn't an option. And the reasonable part in him was still sufficiently in charge to restrain his worst self. James darted out of the room, and from his eyes, Harry understood that what was happening inside him was probably happening in a weaker degree inside his son too, and he damned himself for having transmitted this tract of his character to another being. Poor James had inherited too much from him for his own good, and this showed in all his repressed anger and discontent. Albus, who had luckily got only his eyes, was definitely the happier and more equilibrated of the two. He didn't move, and from the outside he was as immobile as a statue, but on the inside a fight was raging between his instinct and his mind, a strenuous and hard-fought battle. The mind eventually got the better, stomping back down his instinct, still putting up a struggle to keep afloat. But it was finally subdued, and Harry could move again. His muscle relaxed, and reason started to retrieve possession of his mind after having been forced to retrocede. It was like a proper waking up. But Ginny and Albus were still paralyzed under the tension that had united them in a situation in which they were excluded, with the fear to have to assist to something ugly that fortunately hadn't happened. The two unfroze after a while, but they kept their position, in silence, not knowing what to say. Harry sat, sighed, and took his head in his hands, massaging his temples, as the motive of the escalation popped in his mind again. The Fidelius charm was broken, and there was no way to stop the diffusion of their address. It was bound to spread like wildfire. How many people didn't know already? Impossible to say. Impossible to stop. It was a matter of time before people would knock at the door. "What happened at Albus? Do you know something?" he asked to his cool-tempered son. "He sneaked out to visit Bianca yesterday, but flu powder. He got back very cranky. I don't know what's happening there. Mrs. Pennyworth is Bianca's mother. He got the letter. He doesn't want me to say though," he let out all in one breath, fearful. Harry reproached himself seeing his demeanour. He didn't want to terrorize his son in speaking against his brother. He didn't want to terrorize his son. Period. As he stood up to stroke Albus' head, a slight flinch was detectable when he outstretched his hand. No good. Definitely not good. Albus relaxed under the stroking. Was there any point to apologize again? Is there any point to keep apologizing for his scary outburst? What do you do? He asked, turning to Ginny, who was still standing in the same spot. She sat slowly, supporting herself on the edge of the table. I don't know, she said, rubbing her face in concern. We may have to move. She added, dismayed. In her eyes there radiated the exhaustion of what it was going to comport. Is it that bad? Albus asked. Yes, Albus, it is bad, and you realize how bad in the next few days. Not another word was added. They started to clear up the table, and Harry's ear was strained to capture any unusual noise from the outside. But neither there, nor from James' room, any sound could be heard. Once in the bedroom, while Ginny was preparing for the night, he looked outside the window. The street was deserted, and there were no owls going back and forth for the time being. How were they going to find another house so convenient? How long would it take? Where to go in the meanwhile? And besides all those questions, the idea to move filled him with sadness. They spent so many happy moments in the house. He meant to relinquish the place where Lily's memories were linked so strongly. It still pained him going in her room, as it pained him all the time he looked at her empty place around the table, or where she used to sit on the sofa. But as they pained him, he didn't want to have to abandon them. It would have been really as if leaving her behind, and despite it could have helped him in a way, he was averse to it. He thought about George, and how he always refused to move from his place, albeit everybody strongly advised him to do so. And he finally understood the reason behind the refusal. George didn't want to lose the place he had shared with Fred. A bit as though it could be possible for him to return, despite being fully aware that it wasn't going to happen. It was the same for him now. It was impossible to destroy that tiny, malignant, corroding hope hiding under the rationality that one day she would return. And if she did, he had to be there, where she left them. But then the rationality prevailed again, crushing back the hope with the finality of a truth that tortured him, so incontrovertible as it was. She would never be back. Never. It didn't matter if they moved or not. She would never be back. And Harry thought that if it was possible to cancel a word from the word, he would have chosen that one. Never. Ginny, finishing her routine, found him there, looking outside, tangled in an uneasiness, and, like after every time he had this excess of anger, tired and dejected. Everything seemed of the deepest shade of blue. She took his hand and brought him to bed without saying a word. And then, with caresses and kisses steadily growing in passionate intensity, she rekindled the atmosphere of the morning. And lost in the warmth of her body, all the negativity of the evening melted, all the problems dissolved in those overpowering sensations that only her could provoke in him. She was lending him her body to channel all what was wrong in something better, to make reemerge his good self. When they finally lie side to side, panting in that delightful weakness after having loved fully, his mind was clearer and his soul quietened from all the rushes of the day. He embraced her tenderly, kissing the back of her neck. The silence of the room was punctuated only by their breathing. After a few minutes, Ginny spoke. Harry, I don't want to have to fear you. He kept her tightly, reflecting on his behavior of the evening. It was clear what she meant. She had been scared he could get violent. And she was right. It could have happened. He realized it well enough now with a clear mind. but the last thing he wanted was her or Albus to feel that way toward him. Yes, even James. You don't have to. I cut my head before hurting you or the boys. It'll never happen. I'll control my anger better. I won't let it anymore to run away with me. He meant it. Before Lily's death, he had always managed to do it more or less successfully, but after the outburst right after it, it seemed a dam had broken and anger was flooding in him. When he would mend the breach, another one was opening under the pressure, and James' behaviour didn't help in checking it. But it wasn't his fault. He felt to be the only one to be blamed for everything he failed to do in his regards and for everything he hadn't been able to be. She turned, facing him, and passed her long fingers in his hair, pulling it back from his forehead. And with her mouth, she traced the contour of his scar, the origin of all his problems. Ginny, what do we do? Where do we go? In a few days, here it will be hell, he whispered. Honestly, there is just one place I can think of that is safe enough. Which one? Hermione's and Ron, she answered. I'm a shell cottage. I'm covered with blood as the snow around me. I've just beaten Blonde almost to death, but I don't feel any regret nor pity. I know I've done the right thing. Going back, I would do just the same. The insane anger is not there, but hate lingers. Nobody is around besides us. Ron's body lies behind me. I know he's alive, but barely. Lily's body is there too, somewhere, but I cannot see her. I turn to look at him, wanting to finish the deed. But it's not Ron, the one I've just beaten. It's not Ron, the one on the ground. It's James, in the pool of blood. Nobody will ever know about this dream.